Righto, let's start with one of my favourite bits of corporate theatre. The control that exists beautifully on paper and absolutely nowhere in real life. You know the one. It's in the procedure. It's in the training deck. It's in the audit checklist. It's maybe even laminated and zip-tied to a fence somewhere. Everyone nods at it like it's doing something useful. Meanwhile, out in the field, the thing's about as protective as a wet serviette. That gap matters. In investigations, especially with an ICAM lens, we've got to stop treating documented as if it means effective. It doesn't. Never has. A control is only a control if it actually influences the work and reduces the risk in practice. Not in policy. Not in a procedure folder nobody opens unless the auditor's in the car park. In practice. Safety-wise bangs on about safe systems of work for a reason. The whole point of the investigation process is to establish facts, identify contributing factors, review the adequacy of existing controls and procedures, and recommend corrective actions that reduce risk and prevent recurrence. That means one very blunt question sits at the center of all this. Did the control actually control anything? Because a lot of organizations confuse evidence of existence with evidence of function. We had a JSA. Good for you. Was it used? Was it suitable? Did it cover the actual task? Did conditions change? If not, why not? Same with permits, spotters, barricades, pre-starts, training, checklists, journey management plans, you name it. If the thing was present but didn't shape behavior, detect drift, or stop the event, then we need to stop giving it honorary credit. And this is where weak investigations go off the rails. They write, "Procedure not followed," and act like they've solved the mystery. Case closed, Watson. But that's not analysis. That's admin with a disappointed tone. A better investigation asks whether the procedure was available, suitable, understood, applied, supervised, and still workable under the actual conditions on the day. The source material hammers this pretty clearly. Procedures should be accurate, understandable, current, user-friendly, validated, and controlled. Defenses should detect, warn, control, protect, contain, or help recovery. Investigations are supposed to review the adequacy of those existing controls, not just list them like a shopping receipt. So that's the frame for this episode. We're not asking, what control did the paperwork say existed? We're asking, did it work where the risk lived? If the answer's no, or sort of, or, well, technically yes, but no one used it, then you haven't found a naughty worker problem. You've found a systems problem wearing a high-vis vest. Controls fail in the real world in very boring, very predictable ways, and that's the annoying bit. Half the time, it's not some dramatic Hollywood collapse. It's just ordinary weakness. Poor design, bad placement, weak training, no supervision, or a control that only works if the stars align, nobody's rushed, and everyone behaves like a training video extra. Take placement. A warning is only useful if it can be seen in time. One of the examples in the material talks about a warning placard not being in a prominent location. That matters. A visual warning system, a strobe, a sign, a placard, a set of crossing lights. If it's technically there, but hard to notice, washed out, obscured, or late, that's not an effective defense. That's decoration with ambition. Same with training. People love saying, they were trained. Beautiful. On what? When? Was it current? Was competency verified? Did the training match the actual task, or did we just throw a generic induction at them 3 years ago and hope muscle memory would sort it out? The guides are crystal clear here. Training should provide the correct knowledge and skills, and its effectiveness should be measurable, not assumed, measured. Then there's supervision. One of the classic absent or failed defenses in the ICAM guide is awareness through supervision. Not because supervisors are magic, but because supervision is one of the ways a system notices that the work as done has drifted away from the work as intended. If there's no active supervision, or the supervisor's flat out, or they tolerate shortcuts because production's barking, controls erode quietly. And that's before we get to time pressure. The material on human factors and violations is blunt as hell. Lack of time, resource pressure, production targets, incompatible goals. They all push people towards situational or organisational optimising violations. Workers don't wake up twirling a villain moustache thinking, "Today I shall bypass the control." More often, they're trying to get the job done in the conditions they've been handed. So an installed control is not the same as an effective control. Installed means it exists. Effective means it still functions under workload, inconvenience, weather, competing priorities, change, distraction, fatigue, habit, and normal human behaviour. Big difference. That's why just listing spotter assigned, procedure available, or pre-start completed tells me bugger all on its own. I want to know whether the spotter could actually communicate, whether the procedure matched the task, whether the pre-start identified the real hazard, whether the control was verified in use, and whether anybody checked it was still holding up when the day got messy. Now we get to the bit that catches plenty of leaders napping: drift. Controls don't usually fail all at once. They get nibbled to death, bit by bit. People adapt because the job still has to get done, and the control is clunky, unavailable, unclear, too slow, or just plain irritating. And to be fair, workers are often doing what humans do best, making the system function despite its own nonsense. If the proper tool isn't available, they improvise. If the permit process doesn't fit the actual work, they work around it. If the checklist is bloated with garbage and misses the real hazards, they tick it and get on with the task. If the barricade blocks the only sensible access route, someone moves it. Not because they're reckless every time, but because the system has created a gap between what's required and what's possible. The source material on violations lays this out nicely. Situational violations happen when there's a gap between the rules and what's available. Routine violations become habitual when the breach is implicitly accepted. Passive tolerance of violations is another beauty. Management or peers see the unsafe behaviour and do nothing. That's drift with official silence. Where was I going with this? Oh, right. Repeated workarounds become the new normal. Once that happens, the control still appears to exist in the system, but the system has effectively voted it off the island. The paperwork says one thing, work as done says another. And because nobody got hurt yesterday, everyone starts treating the workaround as proof it's safe. It isn't. It's just familiar. That's the trap. Absence of drama gets mistaken for evidence of control. The guides even warn against complacency developing after long periods without a serious incident. An organisation with a good record is not necessarily a safe organisation. Too right. Sometimes it just means you've been lucky while drift's been happening quietly in the background. Management often misses this because drift is boring. It doesn't come with sirens. It looks like small deviations, little tolerances. We've always done it that way. Or it's quicker if. And if supervision is thin, feedback is poor, audits are superficial, or action tracking on prior incidents is weak, the drift becomes invisible. Until something finally lines up and bites someone. So if you're investigating and you hear, "Yeah, nah, everyone does it like that," don't treat that as a confession from the workforce. Treat it as evidence. That sentence is gold. It tells you the workaround is normalised. The control has probably drifted out of practical use, and the organisation may have been passively tolerating the gap for quite a while. This is where ICAM earns its keep. Instead of stopping at the person, you trace the barrier. You ask what happened, organise the timeline, then analyse the contributing factors properly. Not with a furrowed brow and a vibe, with structure. The analysis categories matter. Absent or failed defences, what normally should have prevented the event or limited the consequence. Task and environmental conditions, what was present immediately before or at the time that influenced human or equipment performance. Individual or team actions, what errors or violations directly led to the incident. Organisational factors, what latent conditions, decisions, processes or practices set the scene and allowed the rest to happen. If you use that properly, blame starts looking pretty lazy. Because when someone says operator error, The ICAM response is basically, "Cool story, now keep going." Why was the defense absent or failed? Why was the task shaped that way? Why did the conditions promote the error? Why did the organization tolerate or create those conditions? And before you get too cozy with witness statements, remember the interview material. Witnesses are valuable, but memory is fallible and malleable. So gather broadly. Use PEOP, people, environment, equipment, procedures, organization. Cross-check the data. Validate facts with evidence. Don't rely on whoever sounds the most confident in the crib room. When you're tracing a control, I reckon there are 4 brutally useful questions. Was it designed? Was it used? Was it verified? Was it monitored? If a control wasn't properly designed for the task, that's one problem. If it was well designed but not used, you've got to understand why. If it was meant to be used but nobody verified it, that's another hole. And if the organization never monitored whether it remained effective over time, there's your drift problem again. The Pocket Guide gets there from another angle with check questions. Does this factor describe the equipment, work process, control measure, detection system, procedure, or attribute that normally prevents the incident or limits the consequence? Good, then classify properly. Is supervision the failed defense? Or is the person's lapse the action? Or is time pressure the condition? Or is poor training the organizational factor? If you jumble those, your recommendations will be rubbish. And recommendations must link back to absent or failed defenses and organizational factors. Not just retrain worker, remind team, be more careful. That's not learning. That's nagging in a report template. So what does a good control actually look like? First off, not decorative, not ceremonial, not the sort of thing that only works if everyone remembers, interprets, complies, and stays motivated forever. Good controls are hard to bypass, easy to verify, and they fit the work. That's where the hierarchy of controls matters. It's in the training material for a reason. Elimination, substitution, engineering, admin, PPE. And yes, we all know what happens in real life. People leapfrog straight to admin and PPE because it's cheap, fast, and looks productive in a spreadsheet. Behold, another poster, safety saved. But engineering beats hope every day of the week. If you can physically remove the hazard, isolate it, design the system so the unsafe act is difficult or impossible, or build in detection and recovery that actually functions, you're miles ahead of a control that depends on memory, motivation, and perfect communication. The source material says, further down the hierarchy, the risk still exists, and admin and PPE are not preferred controls. Exactly. They can be part of the picture, sure, sometimes as interim measures or supplements. But if your whole risk strategy is a procedure, a toolbox talk, and a bloke in safety glasses being told to watch out, don't act shocked when the system coughs up the same event again. Here's a dead simple test for listeners. If the control fails silently, it probably isn't enough. If nobody knows it's not working until after the incident, you may have a very weak defense. Think passive devices that don't provide active feedback, warnings that can be missed, procedures that are assumed rather than checked, training records that prove attendance but not competence, audits that confirm paperwork but not practice. A stronger control gives you signal. It tells you when it's degraded, bypassed, unavailable, out of date, or not fit for use. It doesn't just sit there quietly being praised in board reports. And one more thing, good controls are usable. If the control makes normal work impossible, crews will adapt around it. Then management will act surprised, which is always cute. So design matters. Procedure content matters. Availability matters. Equipment integrity matters. Communication matters. If you want compliance in practice, make the safe way the workable way. So let's wrap the whole thing up without fluff. The lesson is simple. Controls must be real, not ceremonial. A control that only exists in documentation, induction slides, or the imagination of middle management is not a control. It's stationary. Investigators and leaders need to test controls against reality. Do they hold up under workload? Do they survive change? Do they still function when the weather's ordinary, the shift's busy, the supervisor's pulled away, the task changes halfway through, and human beings behave like human beings? Because that's the exam, not the audit, not the policy launch, the work. Use the structure. Gather properly with PEPO. Validate facts. Build the timeline. Analyze through absent or failed defences, task or environmental conditions, individual or team actions, and organisational factors. Ask whether the control was designed, used, verified, and monitored. And for the love of common sense, stop rewarding yourself just because something was installed, issued, trained, or signed off. If the control can be ignored without consequence, if it can drift without detection, if it depends entirely on perfect human behaviour, or if nobody can tell whether it's actually functioning, then it's probably not enough. And if your recommendations don't fix that, you're not learning. You're just rewording disappointment. Paper safety does not stop injuries. Real controls do. That's the difference. And next time someone tells you, "Yeah, but it was in the procedure," do us all a favour and ask the only question that matters. Did it actually control anything?